We're talking about a $45 billion beauty empire, a high-stakes crusade for looted art, and a brutal family feud. It's all about legacy, control, and what actually happens when the glamorous facade of a family business starts to crack. So, imagine this massive irony. Our story kicks off with Ronald Lauder. Now, you know him as an heir to the Estee Lauder Cosmetics fortune, a former US ambassador, and the president of the World Jewish Congress. For decades, he's literally been the world's most famous crusader for returning Nazi-looted art to Jewish families. But what happens when the guy hunting stolen art discovers it hanging in his very own museum? Yeah, the Neue Gallery. It's a staggering contradiction, right? The man leading the charge to right the historical wrongs of the art world is suddenly forced to confront the ghosts living inside his own world-class collection.
And honestly, that irony, it's the absolute perfect metaphor for the Estee Lauder Cosmetics empire itself. From the outside, the company projects this beautiful, flawless facade, right? A 40 billion plus global giant that's basically the definition of luxury and elegance. But look beneath that polished surface, and you'll find a deeply complicated and, frankly, crumbling foundation. We're talking intense infighting, financial collapse, and a completely fractured family.
But to understand how that foundation cracked, we've got to look at how it was built in the first place. The story starts simple enough. Back in 1946, Estee Lauder launches her company from Queens, New York, with just 4 products. And her sales philosophy was pure genius. Just hand a woman a sample, let her try it on her own skin, and she'll buy it. And man, did it work. That simple act built an insane level of brand loyalty. Alongside her husband, Joseph, she built this empire that eventually scooped up iconic names like Clinique, Origins, and MAC, turning the Lauders into one of the wealthiest and most fiercely private dynasties in American business.
Now fast forward to after Estee passed away in 2004. Her 2 sons, Leonard and Ronald, well, they took all that immense wealth and influence in 2 drastically different directions. They essentially created 2 distinct branches of this dynasty. You had Leonard Lauder, who spent over 3 decades inside the company, methodically building it into a multi-billion-dollar global operation, and eventually donating a Cubist art collection worth over $1 billion to the Met Museum. But then you have Ronald Lauder, who went an entirely different route. He dove headfirst into politics, diplomacy, even ran for mayor of New York, all while building an incredible private collection of Austrian and German masterpieces.
And Ronald's passion for this art was next level, especially for works from right before World War II. In 2006, he made global headlines. Why? Because he paid a record-breaking $135 million for Gustav Klimt's portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer eye. Just let that number sink in, $135 million. This was a masterpiece stolen by the Nazis, and it had only recently been returned to the original owner's family after a huge legal battle. Ronald bought it and put it on permanent public display at his museum in New York.
But here's where the timeline gets really fascinating. You see, Ronald's dual roles as art savior and art collector basically collided. He founded the Commission for Art Recovery, actively pressuring governments to return stolen works. But look at this progression. In 2006, he buys that recovered Klimt. 10 years later, in 2016, after a ton of criticism about a lack of transparency, he actually has to admit that a piece in his own museum's holdings had a clouded, possibly Nazi-tainted past. And this all culminated in 2023, when he agreed to return several Egon Schiele drawings to the heirs of a Jewish cabaret performer murdered in a concentration camp. So the public face of restitution was simultaneously forced to clean up his own house. And you know, just like Ronald's pristine art empire was suddenly forced to face some incredibly uncomfortable truths, the family's actual cosmetics business was heading into real trouble. While Ronald was navigating the fallout over those drawings, the core business, the very thing funding his empire, was quietly and then very loudly falling apart. We aren't just talking about a little family squabble here. This was a massive corporate earthquake sending absolute shockwaves through the broader financial market.
So why did the stock collapse? Well, for years, Estee Lauder rode this massive wave of success, mostly fueled by Chinese luxury spending and duty-free travel retail. But that wave, it crashed hard. They got hit by 3 massive headwinds. First, a huge slowdown in Chinese demand. Second, a bloated cost structure that had just gotten completely out of hand. And third, a series of underwhelming product bets that just missed the mark. This wasn't some minor dip. We're talking about a prolonged slide that wiped out tens of billions of dollars in market value. Billions with a B. And look, you simply can't wipe out tens of billions of dollars in value without some severe, real-world consequences. This financial wipeout forced the global beauty giant into a seriously painful restructuring plan. They had to slash thousands of jobs just to try and stop the bleeding.
Almost overnight, the hyper-private, highly polished world of the Lauder dynasty was thrust into the harsh, unforgiving light of a very public corporate crisis. Which brings us to the succession war. All this financial stress triggered a brutal boardroom battle over who should lead the turnaround, splitting the family squarely down the lines of Estee's two sons. In one corner, you've got Faction 1, William Lauder. He's Leonard's son, the executive chairman, and he firmly wanted to stay the course with the current strategy. In the other corner, Faction 2, Jane Lauder. She's Ronald's daughter, a longtime exec, and her name was being aggressively floated as the new CEO. Remember, these aren't just random executives arguing over a spreadsheet. These are cousins. This was an incredibly toxic collision between two branches of a billionaire family, actively vying for the crown while the castle burned around them.
Things got so unbelievably desperate behind closed doors that the company actually entertained an outside rescue. Merger talks surfaced with the Spanish beauty conglomerate Puig, but, and this is entirely indicative of their internal dysfunction, those talks eventually collapsed over price and governance disputes. I mean, think about why this matters. For a fiercely independent, proud family to even consider handing the keys over to a rival, that shows exactly how deeply fractured their internal foundation had really become.
Then, the chaos and internal friction ultimately hit a peak in 2025 when Leonard Lauder passed away. Now, before his death, Leonard had reportedly grown incredibly unhappy with the leadership steering the company's turnaround. So his passing wasn't just the loss of a former CEO, it was the patriarch dying while watching the very legacy he built literally tear itself apart. It completely removed a monumental, foundational pillar from the company, right smack in the middle of the most turbulent period in its history.
And his death triggered immediate financial shockwaves. Following his passing, roughly $1 billion, $1 billion in Estee Lauder shares were sold off just to help settle Leonard's estate. Think about the absolutely devastating timing of that. A massive sell-off right when the stock was already battered to pieces. It added incredible downward pressure and structural strain to a dynasty that was already fracturing from within.
But guys, here is the most remarkable part of this entire saga. Despite the stock crash, the bitter leadership infighting, the failed merger, and $1 billion sell-off to settle an estate, the Lauder family still holds a commanding majority of the voting power. They call the shots. The outside shareholders, they're basically just along for a very, very bumpy ride.
Because the bottom line is simply this. The name on the bottles is still the name running the boardroom. They built this empire from absolutely nothing, from 4 small products in Queens, and despite these massive, highly visible cracks in their foundation, they absolutely refuse to let go of control. It is their legacy, and they are holding onto the reins no matter how turbulent the ride gets.
Which brings us right back full circle to our opening metaphor. Are the Lauders holding on to their company the exact same way they hold on to their art? Because think about it, it's a beautiful entity, built over decades, standing on a very complicated foundation. And it's being held captive by a family that, much like a stubborn collector guarding a masterpiece with a clouded history, is completely unwilling to release its grip, regardless of the controversy surrounding it.
So that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question to consider today. When a foundation really starts to crack, how much damage will a dynasty endure before they finally just let go? At what point does fiercely preserving a family legacy actually end up destroying the very beauty it was meant to protect? It's a fascinating dynamic unfolding in real time, and it's definitely one we're going to be watching closely.